try to pre-decide as much as possible. So we're bombarded with thousands of decisions every day, right? And if you're trying to figure out every decision when it comes up, it's stressful and it's decision overload. But if you can build principles or philosophies or decisions in life and say, I'm going to pre-decide how much I'm going to drink in any one sitting, right? I'm going to pre-decide what the first hour of my day is going to look like. I'm going to pre-decide those things. Then that kind of informs your habits and informs your disciplines and informs your decision making.
Welcome to the Stacking Habits Podcast with your hosts, David, Matthew, and Caleb. Our mission each week is to dig into the habits, rituals, and routines of guests who are living life to the fullest. But remember, knowledge without action is worthless. So be sure to take what you hear and put it into practice. Turn these words into works in your own life. Without further ado, let's dive in. Well, welcome back to the Stacking Habits Podcast. This will be episode 21. And as I alluded to in episode 20, this is another local Indiana Hoosier. I think actually, it might be Ohio. Maybe not a Hoosier born and bred, but he's been a Hoosier for quite a long time. This is one of my golf buddies, and it's a very interesting dichotomy between our last guest. Our last guest was a director or VP of advancement, which means he goes and asks donors for money. Our guest today has a bit of the opposite role. We kind of view him as the Santa Claus in our community, and he heads up a nonprofit. We'll kind of dig into that, hear that story of how it got started. But our guest today is Rich Haddad, and his job essentially is to give away money and steward their portfolio. So we'll kind of get into that. Rich is a fellow numbers guru. He actually has credentials, unlike myself, but we can both nerd out over spreadsheets. He's got a background in a little bit of corporate finance and doing some CPA work for, I think, KPMG. So, and he's been running the current nonprofit role for about 17 years. And he's also a very accomplished golfer. I think one of the benefits of golf is you really get to see someone's personality. And so Rich has seen my ups and downs on the golf course. We played a lot of rounds. And it feels like Rich wins the club championship about every other year. So he's a formidable opponent, and we're really glad to have you on the show. So welcome to the show, Rich.
Glad to be here. Look forward to a great conversation together.
Yeah, so we're kind of, this is episode 2 of our community or our relationship series. And so we want to figure out how to strengthen relationships and sort of dig and prod into some of the habits that are related to it. And with your role, you're incredibly connected to the community. And so for those listening, everybody lives in a community unless you happen to live in the middle of nowhere or a bunker. But I think most people listening would be part of a community and see different various pieces of it. But Rich's job is in the weeds in the community, and he's quite a connector. Even though he's a numbers person, he's pretty social, and he goes out in the community and engages and tries to strengthen it. So Rich, why don't you just tell a little bit about your backgrounds and then tell us about K21, just so people listening have a little bit of a concept of your role.
Yeah, Caleb, I've like you said, I've always taken to numbers. I remember even in kindergarten, I was given advanced math, like I got to add, 3 and 4 numbers across as opposed to a single numbers, right? And so it just was an early indicator of kind of how my brain functions. And I think, we'll dig deeper, but I really think one of the secrets of life is to really figure yourself out. I think we're all created with unique personalities, unique gifts, unique talents. And I think one of the fulfillment goals in life is to really be self-aware and then see where that path takes you and try to maximize just how you're built, right? And so way back in the day when I was in college, I thought I wanted to get into computer science, and that was early because I'm pretty old, and it was mostly programming work. And I didn't kind of get off on putting all sorts of interesting things in my programs. I just built the program and moved on, or whatever language we were learning. But I took accounting early on, and it was like, this is the easiest thing I've ever done. And in the 80s, there was a lot of opportunity to start out a good career kind of down an accounting track. And so I kind of shifted pretty quickly, and that's where kind of got my start. Realized as I got into that profession that accounting, I love accountants, but they're reporting or figuring things out that have already happened. And my personality wanted to be involved. I wanted to be at the table. I wanted to actually be part of the decision-making process. And so over a couple of opportunities, I shifted into more financial planning and financial analysis, which gave me the opportunity to use numbers to hopefully make really wise, informed decisions. That really, I think, resonated with me. That's where I got into, you mentioned, I got into financial planning and investment planning, and really trying to help small business owners and employees with their 401k, figuring those things out, to just give every person the best opportunity to make good decisions based on data, based on the numbers. And so I think that's where I kind of settled into, I want to do that, whatever that can look like. Ultimately, 17 years ago, I got an opportunity to step into the K21 Health Foundation, which is a private foundation. The money came from the local nonprofit hospital. They sold to a larger health system, took the proceeds, and said, now what? And so they created this foundation out of the proceeds of the sale. And they created a mission that, hey, let's continue to help local people, because the hospital was local, and help them in the area of health, whether it was health needs or health opportunities. And we're going to take this money and basically manage the portfolio so we can give money away in perpetuity. So the idea of this is we get to give money away every year. And if we're doing our job investing wisely in the portfolio, this can happen. This money generation can happen forever, because the principle of what you started with is what you want to protect, and then you're giving away essentially all the growth or gains that you're generating. So it's really took me into what I would say is my, and been here 17 years, my long-term kind of satisfaction of being in the investment financial numbers world, but making a difference in the world around me with it. And so, yeah, it's been a real, I guess, opportunity or honor to kind of play this role for the community.
Hey, Rich, I don't want to be that guy, but is K21's fund size, is that public knowledge?
Yeah, it is. We have to report to the IRS every year, and those returns get posted. So we started with $63 million way back in '99 when it was sold. We've given away, actually, just late this past year, David, we actually gave away cumulatively more than $63 million. And we ended the year with over 80 million in assets. So again, the idea of a perpetual or permanent endowment is, hopefully, if we're doing our job, the assets grow faster than the pace in which we give them away. And so we hope to keep up with that spending or buying power of inflation. So the assets slowly continue to grow over time, but we get to generate what is now about $3.5 to $4 million of granting out every year in perpetuity. So super cool the way it works, as long as you do your job on the investment side.
What's harder, making the money or giving it away?
I would say giving it away, to be honest, because one of the things I use the term stewardship is there's a real responsibility to give money away well. It's actually kind of an internal joke, the idea of being Santa Claus. You know, it's easy for people to see our foundation and go, I'm going to hop on the lap and ask for money. But because this money is the community's, not mine, it's not the board's money, it's really the community's money, they take giving it away well, very seriously. And we want to uphold the mission that really the original donors that built the hospital way back in the early 70s, they wanted to impact health for their community. And so how do we give that money away in a way that we think is going to matter and make a difference in the area of health for the people who live here? So yeah, we go through a pretty rigorous process to make those decisions. The making the money, we probably would be pretty boring in the investment world. We have a very diverse portfolio, and we take the long play. It's not like, hey, I need this money in 5 years. It's, I'll never need this money back. It needs to work for me. And so we can get into some longer term investments, some illiquid investments where we don't need that money. We just need it to produce, right? So that's a little more systematic. And we work with an investment consultant to kind of help navigate us in those decisions.
So what you're telling me is you guys don't have any cryptocurrency in your fund or your holdings?
Yes.
Because Bitcoin's going wild right now.
It is, man. Imagine what we could give away if we had put it all in Bitcoin. I would say
You could also
not
be
yet.
like Silicon Valley Bank and go completely out of business because half your balance sheet is in Twitter stock.
That's right. That's right. And as an example, we're actually building up our private equity portfolio, and it'll ultimately hold about 10% of the portfolio. Now, again, that's very illiquid. It takes 7-8 years to kind of build up that and then have it, pay out over time. But the premium versus the public equity markets is there, and it's consistently been there. And you got to find the right tools to be able to get in that, because in reality, we're not ultra rich either. You think about the high end wealth in the community, and there's a lot of people worth more than 80 million. But yeah, I would say we're not out there betting the farm in anything. I think it's just more about those typical principles of diversity, spreading that money around so any particular sector can kind of take a hit and we'll be okay.
Walk us through asset allocation. I know we want to dig into the community aspects, but from an asset allocation standpoint, you mentioned you're not as focused on growth. So you're probably not necessarily mirroring more of an index funds. Are you a bit more conservative in that approach because your main goal is to not lose money?
Yeah, I'm. So the IRS rules on a private foundation, basically they're saying, hey, you're a 501c3, you're a nonprofit, but you only have one reason why we've given you this status. It's to give money away, right? You're not a public charity like a lot of nonprofits. So they require us to expend on average 5% of the assets every year. So kind of the long-term, I would say conservative goal is if we can grow the assets on average 8% or better, right? Then we can give that requirement away and grow over long haul. We're going to grow the assets. So yeah, Caleb, that kind of sets the boundaries to where we don't have to, try to shoot for a home run or do anything crazy. So we have a large part of the portfolio we would call passive investments. We're going to get our bread and butter S&P 500 passive with hardly any expense, behind that, like a Vanguard or something where we can just buy the market. And we do that on both the fixed income side and the equity side. And that's a good percentage of the portfolio. Then we can get more aggressive and more targeted with the rest of the portfolio. So we can get into some small cap stuff. We can get into private equity, real estate. We get into some low volatility funds to try to get into equity, but in a defensive place. So we kind of build out the rest of the pie chart in ways that either protects or enhances the core return, if that makes sense. So we kind of feel like our bread and butter is in place. Now let's play a little bit, either to protect ourselves if we're concerned or to get more aggressive. And a lot of times when you get more aggressive, you have to get more illiquid. You can't get to that money right away like a real estate holding or private equity. But because of the premium of those places, we can carve off a piece of the pie and get into those other things.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were getting into the private equity side. We'll have to swap some notes there. I've been very interested in that from a venture capital and private equity. To your point, a lot of it is illiquid. It's 5 to 10 year time horizons, but you typically are targeting 15 to 20% returns. Theoretically, of course, there's also risk that it goes to zero. But that'd be interesting to chat ideas next time we're on the golf course together.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is if you want no risk, you get no return, right? You just have to know where to push the lever, and the longer you have to wait, the more patient you can be, the more you can kind of take risks, because typically, again, the market's going to fluctuate. But if you don't care about the fluctuations, you're caring about the long-term place it's going to go.
Yep.
So if you've got the time, it's you can take those sort of premium plays, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting seeing the arc of someone's career. I worked in medical device, but one of my tasks was kind of building an iPad application when the iPad first came out. And so I project managed that. And then, of course, the next company was a software company. So I sort of used those skills in the next thing. And now that that's done, I don't know what the next thing is yet, but I imagine some of the skills I learned working for an orthopedic company and running my own tech company will come in play with whatever the next thing is. And your story is very similar. You CFO, financial manager for local, Sim Financial, which is local, and you're kind of taking a lot of those skill sets and now running your own, I guess, fund, for lack of a better word.
Rich, so I think I've got the making money part down. It sounds pretty straightforward. Tell me a little bit about you mentioned being a steward of the fund, a good steward of the fund, and you mentioned that the focus of the of K21 is really trying to advance projects that benefit the community and the
Hmm.
health of the community. So does that mean that if a local orchestra needed to upgrade their concert hall, that type of project would be ineligible? Or like what type of projects are getting funded? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And David, as an analytical guy, when I actually first got here, it was 7 years into the foundation, and it was kind of the original board, and they all knew each other, and they all kind of made decisions. And I remember the first time we had a grant meeting and they made their decisions. I had a new board member who called me up 2 days later. He's a businessman. He goes, "Hey, I got a question for you. I'm not sure how they made those decisions. Like, feels like some of it was inconsistent. It was very subjective." And I was like, "Dude, I'm with you," because it felt like, and this is what I would say, about 80% of those decisions were subjective and 20% were objective. Now, we had the mission of health, but they hadn't really, I would say, documented or delineated what does that mean when we say health. And so, really, the next year, I kind of facilitated a board offsite with dinner and said, let's try to define what that means to us, so that we can. And I would say the goal would be, let's make 80% of the decision objective and clear, and leave some art, leave some nuance, 20% subjective. And so that process, and then creating what I would say kind of a definition illustration that we look at every quarter when we sit down and consider grants, is what does health mean to us? And we have a board that rotates. You can serve several terms and then you move on, and we get new board members. And so that kind of, I would say, living document, it's evolved over the years, but that's what sets the tone to, I think, not only unify the board, but help us process those requests as they come. So whether it's the orchestra or a medication assistance program, how does that connect to our definition of what health is? And again, the challenge is anybody can justify their need being health related eventually. There was an old game called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you'd go through the movie, you could just start working through different movies and connections, and eventually Kevin Bacon was involved in one of those movies, right? Well, I always joke that health's the same way. You can get to anything being justifiably a health issue. So we had to create those sort of parameters, guidelines, and kind of grids to help us make decisions in a way that we felt was more consistent. For me, as kind of the CEO who is interacting with these nonprofits or these needs or opportunities, how do I speak and guide them and advise them in ways that is going to be more consistent? If we say no, how do I help explain why that's a no to their request versus a yes to somebody else's? So that's been super helpful. Again, for me, I have no problem having that difficult conversation, but if I don't know why a decision was made, it puts me in a bad spot. So I was kind of driven, probably motivated to get those sort of answers figured out so that I could do my job in the community. And I spend a ton of time in the community, and we want requests. I usually tell people our job is to grant, not to not grant. So I want to help you create as many yeses for our board as possible, but let me kind of guide you and help you. If there is one, let's make a clear connection for what you need and what our mission is. Again, a private foundation is driven by the mission, and so it's their job to connect to our mission, not our job to flex our mission outside of what we do to try to justify making the grant. You know what I'm saying? So it's a little bit like you've got to connect to us, not the other way around.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you tend to pull requests in from the community, or is the community sort of knocking on your door? Is it more of a push or more of a pull typically?
Yeah, Caleb, I'd say historically we've been mostly them knocking on the door. But I think as we've tried to evolve and be more engaged in the conversation and more engaged at the table, one of our missional responsibilities we feel is to help identify the health needs in our community. And so in order to do that job, we need to be at the table helping flag those things. And then again, I'm a problem solver, analytical guy by nature. So, hey, let's sit down and try to figure it out. Let's try to solve it. But at the end of the day, we don't do anything. I'd say that kind of with a smile on my face. All we do is provide the funding, right? So if there's a need that doesn't have a solve in our community, K21 can't just create a program, right? We have to try to help the nonprofits or the schools or the municipalities, the government to say, hey, if we help support it financially, can you do this or can we get this going? So I'm certainly influential in that way of trying to figure it out and then work on a solution. But our role at the end of the day is to bring the financial solution into that program. So we need those programs or those solves to exist or to be built in order for us to do our job.
Yeah. What's a typical check size that you write?
The largest one we've probably done is $2 million to help build a brand new YMCA in the community. We kind of were the lead gift. And so we kind of stepped out and made it was a $12.5 million
wow.
project, right? And so we said, we're in for two. And then the cool thing is that as they went around to some of the large corporations and looked for some other seven-figure gifts, I got to be part of those meetings and talk about why we felt this next phase or next iteration of the why was so important to the health of our community. So I could kind of give background or testimony to why K21 sees this as critically important. So it was a really great opportunity for me to voice into some of those big donor meetings that the Y needed to have. We also early on, I would say, took on a project where we got together with I brought in 8 other health nonprofits to the table and said, look, if we build a single building where all of you can work together under one roof, would you come? Would you be willing to come here, pay the minimum amount of rent just to cover the overhead, and you have a space designed for you? There's a lot of central meeting space and lobby space, so you're going to save a bunch of money, and you could start working together a little more collaboratively. And they all said yes. So we actually built a $5 million building, designed it for each of them, custom, furnished it all for them, and basically created kind of a central place for people to come for a variety of health needs. And then ultimately we granted the cost of that away over time in order to count it as a grant. But that was something, to your point, we took the lead on. We needed them to buy in and say, we're in if you do it for us. But that was by far our biggest project or biggest, I would say, grant. But they go down as small as maybe a couple $1,000s. And that's where, like you said, the knocking on the door, it's what do you need? And if $2,000 is something that helps you move forward, we're open to it. So it's a pretty wide range. Like I said, we're at 3.5+ million every year. And I'll say one more thing: we do have ongoing relationships where there's direct health services or critical programs happening that we support every year, and that represents about 1/3 of our grant making. Would be, I would say, relationship grant making, where we love what you do, it's important what you do, and so we're supporting kind of their ongoing program or operations to make sure that stays in the community. So a good percentage is, I would say, repeat customers, so to speak.
I like that.
Good. Go ahead, Caleb.
I was going to say, do you sort of follow up with the donations, or do you give it no strings attached and you trust what they're doing, or do you try and check back in and see, gauge its effectiveness without kind of micromanaging? Do you have a process and a rhythm for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do somewhat. Most of our grants, I would call, are conditional, which means you need to give us something in order to get the money. Most of the time, in order to make sure the project happens, we're going to look for invoices from them. So let's say they want to build a new playground at a child care center, right? And instead of just saying, here's $60,000, I hope this gets built, what we typically tell them is, let the playground people know they can get paid within a week. Just grab their invoice, send it to us, we'll write the check, right? And that allows us to see the project happen because we're in the middle of it. So yes, we're in on this, but there's kind of an exchange of paperwork or documents that kind of helps us feel like the funds we're distributing are going to what was intended to impact. So, and then we do a final report. All grants have to submit a final report that essentially is, hey, how did this go? The number of people that has been impacted by this project or by this grant. And it just kind of, for us, wraps up. So we're not super, I would say, super analytical on that, Caleb. We're not, and some foundations are. Some foundations, a couple things. They're very specific in topical impact. You might have a health foundation that says we're going to help oral health in our region, right? And so it's all about the dental care, education, those sort of things. We are pretty broad as far as different health things, but we also, for the most part, want to hear how it went. But I would say that may be a frontier that may evolve for us, is to be a little more, I would say, data targeted. We want to move a needle, or we want to move this issue, and so let's dig in with multiple kind of efforts or projects and assess the effectiveness versus just kind of have it reported back to us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And to give people a little idea of the community, Warsaw and Winona Lake combined are maybe 20,000 people, give or take. I know it flexes up in the summer. It's a lake town. And 3 of the 5, well, 2 of them are merged now, but 3 of the 5 largest orthopedic companies in the world are in our backyard, literally. There's a huge farming community, daylight screens. There's a lot of industry. So David was talking pre-show about traveling to a lot of smaller towns. And in terms of its size, Warsaw has certainly a lot of money, but a lot of people that are invested in the community. So, Rich, you talked a little bit about how your thesis has changed and how the target of health has sort of evolved to, especially over the last 20 years, to kind of be instrumental in the community, kind of solve the ongoing needs. I'm curious how your view of the community has changed over that time. So you're managing 2 different things. You're managing the numbers side, and you've grown that even in some down years. So that's pretty impressive. And that's definitely your numbers backgrounds. But in terms of the community, has anything surprised you, or how has your views of community changed based on the last 17 years of being so connected?
Yeah, I think, which probably other people would say this as well. When I was not at K21 in different professions, but raising a family, all that good stuff, your view or your purview of the community is what you experience, right? So it's like there are services I didn't need, there are places I didn't go to. It was like, well, what does my family need? What do I like, right? What do I do? Meet Caleb at the golf course, right? So I knew all the golf courses of the county, but there's a lot of the county, because I didn't interact with it in my own walk of life, I didn't know about. And so coming to the foundation where now I'm looking at needs and or grant opportunities, pretty broad and large scale, there were needs that I was now exposed to that I had no idea existed in our community. And there's also great organizations, great people with hearts to want to make a difference that I had no idea were out there doing the good work at the front line, right? So that sort of exposure, I think, and I think for anybody that wants to really engage in their community, you almost have to step out of your lane to really see it honestly and more completely. Your community is only what you're experiencing as far as your everyday walk in life and your interests. So that was a big eye opener for me. We're as typical, probably northern Indiana, somewhat rural. We're not super diverse, but we're getting more diverse. So you mentioned agriculture. We have a pretty large growing Latino population here. And so what are their needs, and how can we help them in their health journey, opportunities and needs? And that might look a little different than kind of the multi-generational, more Caucasian area. We have a pretty large Indian population because of the orthopedic companies. They brought in a lot of engineers and IT people, and they've enjoyed the community and have stayed. So I think it's, again, understanding maybe more than just what you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And frankly, our biggest need population, I would say, is the generational poor white people. People have been here for multi-generations who have mainly just tried to survive, right? And they have all sorts of health challenges and lack of health insurance or lack of capacity to get their children to the right dental care or health care or those sort of things. And so I think it's just, each community, and for us, we're focused on Kosciuszko County. It's 80,000 people in a county of, like you said, the central part of it is about 25,000. So we're really spread out into smaller communities. But it's really matching up our opportunity to make a difference with understanding the needs that are out there, and they're different for every community. So yeah, I think that's where that figuring that out, going places maybe you wouldn't have gone just living your own life. So that's been, again, really helpful for me leading K21. But then it's figuring out how we can best help. Frankly, in our rural community, transportation is an enormous barrier. The capacity for people to kind of work hard just to make ends meet and have very little room time-wise to get to things they need to get to, but also the limitation of their transportation and how do I get to the services or the needs that my kid has or I have or my parent has, right? So, and in rural communities like ours, it's not like, Ubers, everywhere, right? I think we have 3 in the whole county, so they probably don't work all the time. You're
Rich,
not one of those, are you, Caleb?
I'm not yet. I'm not that bored, but I may
Okay.
I may just jump around just to meet some cool people.
There you go. Just to check it out. All right.
Yeah.
Rich, is there a project that stands out as being notable, something that you're really proud of, like, maybe in the last 5-8 years?
Yeah, and this kind of gets into a little bit of what I've found the most fulfilling in this role is there are a lot of opportunities as somebody who's, again, analytical, good with financial things, whether it's accounting or finance or organizational things. I've managed staff. I've had a lot of different experiences that I would call are organizational in nature. And the opportunity to sit down with people of passion, whether they are running an organization and they're overwhelmed or not trained in organizational leadership, or what's been most satisfying is when somebody comes with a passion that and the solve doesn't exist yet. And I've had a couple of opportunities to help birth a service, a nonprofit, a program, or I would say walk alongside somebody who has that sort of either broken heart or is so upset about something that needs solved that they're going to do something about it, but they just have no idea how to go about it, right? How to get a nonprofit started, how to file what they need to file, how to build a board, how to manage people and finances and those sort of things. And so, David, probably the best example of that would be Joe's Kids in our community. It is a children's therapy clinic. So they do physical, occupational, speech therapies for children who need more help than they are developmentally at, right? And that is a model that hardly any hospital or health system will take on because the reimbursement rates don't cover the cost that these kids need, right? And so what you ended up having was these families trying to get to care for their kids would drive over an hour from our community to get the care they need. So now you're adding several hours of transportation to a child who has special or extra needs on top of the actual care that they're trying to get, right? So there was this therapist in town, Rebecca, who absolutely's heart was broken. She worked with the health system and said, we got to get this going. And they said, we've looked at all the numbers, we can't do it. And I had the opportunity to sit down with her at that level and she goes, I'm going to do something. I just need to figure out how to do it. And so from that conversation, K21 has basically walked with her as she birthed this organization. Who actually started as a satellite from another organization an hour and a half away. They were willing to kind of go, yeah, we'll help you get started, but you need a local people to raise money and all that stuff. That lasted a year, and they basically said, we got to have our own organization here. We can't just be a sidebar to another one. But that's been over 10 years now. They have grown so much that we just made this year a $750,000 grant to help them relocate to a new facility that will triple their size and gives them 10 acres to get to expand even beyond. And now
Wow.
they've become a regional therapy clinic where you've got families coming from outside of our county a lot because they're doing such a great job. And so, yeah, David, it's been that journey because it wasn't just about the check we were writing for them. It was the opportunity to really encourage, advise, plan, re-encourage. And this is a lady who is a therapist, and she's built an organization that is a multi-million-dollar organization to help kids. And she's like, there's no way I have the tools to do this. But the right leadership around her, the right board, the community's involvement, support, and then in some small way, I've been able to be part of her journey and the journey of Joe's Kids. So that's probably I would say my best story, but it's an example of being involved in life change beyond the check writing responsibility that we have, right? And that's part of that is it's something I want to do. My board's encouraged me to engage whenever that's an opportunity, and it's been very fulfilling to just be in those sort of relationships and trying to help people.
It's really cool too. I think there's a parallel between your guys' fund that, again, you're always trying to grow, and the impact that you guys have. There's sort of this parallel track where Joe's Kids, it started off small, but it's the benefits and the size just kept compounding throughout the years. And maybe you guys put a little bit of money into it, but a lot of that was the momentum sort of carrying forward. And so I feel like the work that you're doing, it really seems sort of like 1 + 1 = 3, where the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, and the benefits and the funds really reach this point where they start compounding and making a huge impact. That's such a cool story.
Yeah, thanks. And again, like I said, it's the core of what we do is write checks, right? And it's like all we do is invest money and give it away. But it's really the other things we get to be a part of that I think creates a more fulfilling or full satisfaction to the role that K21 is in our community, but also the role personally I get to play.
I'm sure
really,
you get invited. You get invited to a lot of birthday parties, don't you? And holiday parties.
I'm probably not the most fun guy at a party, but I would
Numbers
say
guys are rarely invited.
But yeah, people know me, and they're all friendly because, again, I oversee a pretty important asset for the community. So yeah, but it's great. It's good, and I think part of the way my brain works is the objectivity in which my brain functions is we should never take advantage of that influence, right? It should be used for good and positivity, and it can't be emotional. It can't play favorites. It can't manipulate people because, hey, I've got money that I could offer or not offer. It's really important that go back to that word steward. We're overseeing, we're responsible, and we want to do it in a way that is not being, again, manipulative. It's really, we're here to help. We're here to try to do our part. That's
where a lot of what you said early on, the whole self-awareness piece, that really fits in. It's very important here too. I would hope that if I were in your position, I could resist all the invites to dinner and all that. I'm sure you go out occasionally, but yeah, I mean, if someone offered me a new car or something, it'd be hard to turn that down.
Well, it's been funny, like we always struggle with what kind of marketing should K21 do, because we don't raise money, right? Like our customer is the recipient of the grants. Right. It's not like we're out, we don't have to go sell something. So it's really an odd dynamic in those sort of like typical organizational decisions or elements. The money's already here, right? We just have to, again, invest it well so it keeps producing. But and that's why we always joke that this is the best board you're ever going to be on, because most nonprofits, you got to figure out how to make ends meet and how to generate revenue for your mission to be accomplished. Our job is, your job is to give it away. And so usually most board members, when they rotate off, is like, you're right. This was pretty great.
It's incredible. Rich, I want to follow up on Rebecca's story. So you talked about someone who had their heart break. They saw a need in the community and they felt compelled to go do something. And her story sounds like she connected with the right people. Your heart opened up to her. And I'm sure you connected her with a lot of people along the way with filings and business plans and fundraising and all the pieces that go into it. With all the projects and nonprofits that you've seen in our community specifically, are there any other common trends between companies and nonprofits that do really well and are successful and flourish and grow and are able to actually accomplish what they set out to do versus ones that may have great intentions but sort of fall flat?
Yeah, I would say two things, Caleb. One is you got to build. You can't be afraid to build a really strong board. I know a lot of people that maybe are, the passion was birthed in them and they want control. They're the founder, right? And so a lot of it is, am I willing to submit? And in a nonprofit setting, the authority of a nonprofit is the board of directors. The chief executive of a nonprofit is the executive director or the CEO, whatever you want to call it. And that's typically the founder who gets it started. But you got to be bold enough and confident enough to build the right leadership around you. And Rebecca's a great example, right? She was a professional physical therapist. And now she's being asked to lead the way in raising money and hiring people and managing them. And, all the other things. She just wanted to show up to an exam room and take care of the patient. But what her passion required of her is to step into an executive director role that requires a lot more. That might not have gone as well if she didn't have a great initial board who said, we believe in you and what you're doing so much. Then, the finance person stepped in and said, let me take care of the books. And the marketing person said, let's start building fundraising events. And, the management person and the legal person. So building a strong board of skilled people who believe in the mission, I think is job one. You got to build a strong leadership team. And then I think the other one for me is you have to have a significant fundraising presence. What I'm seeing in the most successful nonprofits is they have at least one major community. If you're anybody, you want to be at this really cool event. And there's a lot of money raised there. But here's what to me is the magic is you have 400 or 500 people who heard the testimonies, who heard the stories, whose hearts were moved, probably gave something, if not a lot, that night. But they're walking out of there knowing the mission and impact and telling their neighbors, their coworkers about you. And so to me, the ability to spread your purpose way beyond what the board or the leader can do is that you're engaging the community in your story. And I think that what I'm seeing is a consistency there, that major fundraising events, you got to make them super cool and fun and almost a social place you want to be. But then they walk out and they're part of your network and they're part of championing you going forward. And I think I see that consistently. So those would probably be the two things that I notice more successful nonprofits having.
Yeah, those are good insights. As it relates to that community involvement and getting people to sort of be those missionaries and proselytes or whatever the right term is to keep that mission going. Have you seen any particular things that sort of keep people engaged? My mind always goes back to everything is marketing. And so it's like, man, you got to tell the stories. You have to get it out consistently. Even our podcast, I still have people every week that reach out and go, hey, I had no idea you had a podcast. And in my mind, right. I threw it out on social media a few times. So I did my job. And, just like you talked about, you don't understand all the needs of a community until you start poking around the edges and get outside of your normal experience. I think the same thing happens. And there's great value in building diversity on the board as well and just getting a range of experiences there. But back to the original question, in terms of getting people kind of pumped and ready to spread that mission, have you figured out, is that just telling the story on social media? How do you get more buy-in to sort of keep that mission growing?
Yeah, I think, again, these fundraisers are really having a good what is it? CMS, right? For nonprofits, it'd be a donor management system. Mm-hmm. And it's like how do we keep stories and keep in front of you without it being annoying or too much? So there's probably this rhythm of staying in touch, whether it's a monthly e-newsletter and you're telling another story of a family whose therapies have changed their life, a donor who's given because something, prompted them to do it. I think it's just being able to create a rhythm of staying in touch so that these big events are easier to continue to have them full, so that your requests for funds are an easier ask. I think it's that relationship. I mean, once they've opened the door to relationship, I think a nonprofit, and again, this is where it's difficult for them because they just want to help, right? Their client, their customer, is to be able to invest in those sort of infrastructure, capacity building areas. We need to have really good systems and rhythms and maybe professional help that we can keep telling stories and keep staying in touch with those that have already raised their hand and said, we're interested in what you do, right? Whether they showed up to a fundraiser or they gave one time or they volunteered, right? You can't lose them once they've raised their hand. But you don't want to overwhelm them or, turn them off by flooding them with things. So I think there's just that rhythm of staying in touch and continuing to remind them of the difference making that your organization has for people.
Yeah. I want to circle back around to one of the first things you talked about in terms of getting outside of your comfort zones and your lanes that you typically run in. And you've had that ability for anybody listening that says, hey, I would love to expand my horizon and just have a better holistic view of what's going on, but they don't have the luxury of giving away $3.5 to $4 million a year. Do you have any recommendations for how people could find, ways that are off the beaten path for them just to be a little more aware of what's going on and then be able to sort of, again, broaden their horizons and possibly be more impactful in their communities?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say listen to your heart. What movies did you see or what reels did you watch where you kind of teared up or you kind of gravitated to, right? What's happening in our world, whether it's our community or around the world, that tends to kind of generate this emotional reaction. So that's what I'd say start with, because probably whatever community you're in, that space that's kind of stirring up your heart and your emotions probably is happening out there in your community. And so that may be one advice is to just listen to how your heart beats.
A financial spreadsheet guy is saying, listen to your heart. That's a really balanced approach. So yeah, find something that resonates, that breaks your heart. I like that. So just expanding your view.
Because again, I don't think, if it's not something we've needed, right? If my kid didn't need therapy or whatever the case may be, intellectual disabilities, Cardinal Services here in town, the primary intellectual disabilities service, if I didn't need that in my journey, then I'm not going to know it and I'm not going to see it. But what things tend to stir up my emotions? Because I do think at the end of the day, you're not going to engage or commit to anything if your heart's not in it. Again, being the analytical guy that I am, I always joke that I have emotions. They're just really, really deep down in there. But I do think that's because that's part of. I just heard a great leader cast the other day. It talks about that why power trumps willpower, and I think we might say we want to be involved or we want to do something, but if we haven't connected the why, what's inside that really stirs us or that's clear, it's probably not, we're not going to stick with it. So I don't know if that's applicable, but that resonated with me. It's like, I want to have a purpose and I want to know why. So that's where I would say is if you're not sure where to start, is think back to what tends to stir your heart and then find that place and try it out. Whether that's, I'm telling you, any nonprofit leader would love to tell their story.
Yeah.
If you just got hold of them and said, I'd just like to hear what you guys do. I didn't know about you. Love to know more about you. And then you can ask those questions. Is there a way I can be a part of it some way? Do you need volunteer help? Do you you need financial support? Do you need fundraising help? I'm great at events, whatever. There's a lot of ways to engage once you realize that's a cause or a purpose that really I get excited about trying to help happen. Yeah, so that's probably what I'd say. And again, every community, they're out there. I think it's just a matter of connecting your interest with the program or the organization.
Yeah, I love that advice. I'm guessing you've read Simon Sinek, Start with Why.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of
For
that.
sure.
And I think one of the goals of our podcast too is to sort of be wide ranging and talk to people from all various walks of life. One of my daughters today was asking, what do you ask guests about? I'm like, well, mostly we just try and find, a broad cross section of people that live different, interesting lives and just be curious about how they approach life and how they impact the world and what they're doing. And, I can learn something from your experience and apply it to mine and vice versa. And so I love that range of ideas and closely related. I phrase it as how you think about something. Until you change how you think, or in your case, talking about the heartstrings, how you feel about something, you're not usually going to have that motivation or that why that's going to drive you to change. And so as we continue to focus on habits and sometimes tangentially so, a lot of that is sort of focused on if we can broaden your horizons, give you an idea or an experience to change how you think or see or feel about something, that may be the driving force that can propel you forward.
Yeah, I always thought growing up and that I was a type A, and then I married a type A and I realized, oh, that's what a type A is, that they're going to be productive and do things without prompting, without really, and I would say even the why. And I realized that I needed to understand why. I needed a purpose or a cause that inspired me, either challenged me or inspired me to step forward. Otherwise, I think at the end of the day, I'm kind of lazy. So when I'm inspired, when I see purpose, when I see the why, I'm in, right? I'm all in and I want to be involved. But I think generally people do need that. There are people built that they're so disciplined and so self-motivated that they don't really need a clear why. They're just going to go after it, right? But I think more people need to, whether it's inspired or they see the purpose or they understand. I think I mentioned earlier, really understanding yourself. How do you take the way you're built, experienced, gifted, motivated, and find that place for that? Whether that's your vocation or an opportunity to impact people around you or the community, find how you are built and where it can best be impactful. So I think that's sort of self-realization, self-understanding is also, I think, a really key to stepping into spaces that will make the biggest difference.
When it comes to understanding yourself, I guess there's kind of three approaches that come to my mind. One is simply sitting with yourself and trying to understand and ask questions and be curious about it. Two would be finding a mentor or people outside of you that say, hey, Rich, you're really gifted at numbers, obviously, as far back as kindergarten. And the third would be sort of experientially, just going out and sampling a range of ideas. You mentioned the kindergarten piece where you kind of recognized that you were good and teachers were pushing you to do well with numbers. Did you recognize that and latch onto it, or was it until college, or was there somebody that stepped in and said something to you? I know a lot of people struggle to find their identity, and that's something that's constantly changing. I'm just curious what kind of turned that light on for you.
I think one of the things I desire is to have mattered, to feel like I'm making a difference, that I have influence and or impact in the life I have, however long that is, right? Hopefully I got a few years left. So I am motivated maybe internally by that. I want to know I mattered. And for me, Caleb, it's probably, I would say all the potential ways you self-discover are there, but mostly for me, it's probably being reflective, learning from what I've seen or what I've experienced in the past to help inform me going forward. And so, I mentioned kind of that transition from accounting to more decision making. I think, the math early on and the fact that I wanted to beat the smart girl in first grade in the spelling bee helped me realize I was competitive and competitively motivated and challenged. What evolved was I'm challenge motivated, hence the other side of probably being lazy, right? I need a challenge. I need a mountain to climb. I need something that motivates me to get on it. Whether that's a competition like you and I golfing, or it's we have a huge problem and somebody needs to help figure this out, or we have this amazing place to go and I have no idea how to get there. Can you help me get there? Those are the places that I realized as I was able to experience those, probably felt the most fulfilled, the most utilized, and that's probably how my self awareness evolved, and I got more and more understanding of what kind of fired me up the most, what got me the most motivated to get off my butt and do something, look back at those, reflect on those, and then use that to maybe narrow where you need to be more and more impactful or more and more purposeful going forward. And so it is kind of this evolution that hopefully you're converging into a more acute impact, because you've kind of shrugged off the other stuff that you can do, but you're not great at it and you don't really like it. You just did it because you had to do it. And I think maybe maturing or self-awareness is, I want to do more of what fires me up the best, that I'm most gifted at, that I feel like is going to make the biggest difference. Is I'm motivated and I'm good at it. Well, why don't I spend as much time there as possible, right?
Yeah, seems like a no-brainer. Well, Rich, I want to be respectful of your time. Thanks for giving us a little glimpse into your world. And again, I love the parallels and sort of the dichotomy between our last guest and you. I do have one other thing I admire about you, and I'd love to end with this, but you are very self-disciplined, and I appreciate that. And even with all the community engagement stuff that you do, you've got something that is kind of unique. I don't know if you stole it from somebody else or borrowed it, but it's your 2-drink rule. And I'd love it if you just share that, just because I think that's a good way to approach it, especially with a job that's as public and as community-minded as what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. I actually, I was too young to know it, but my dad was a incapacitated alcoholic when I was a little kid, and had a miracle conversion out of it. And I mean, complete one day, never touched a drop of alcohol the rest of his life. And I think that as a young child, hearing those stories from he and my mom, and again, this is probably how my brain works too. I never wanted to be out of control. I wanted to make sure I was in control. And even as I was parenting my daughter, I'm like, look, you're going to make whatever decisions you're going to make. What I want to make sure is you don't ever get yourself into a position where you're not in control. You're going to make good decisions, you're going to make bad decisions, but I want them to be your decisions. And so again, that was just whatever inside I wanted to maintain at least some illusion of control. And so as I thought about, the 2-drink maximum, is I don't want ever to be in a place where I've drank more alcohol that I've lost control or I've lost the ability to make good decisions. And so I just drew a line. Like, I know I'm good with 2. I don't know if I'm good at beyond that. So I'm not going to do it. So at any one sitting, that's it. Because I'm there for our friendship, right, Caleb? I'm there to hang out and enjoy each other's company. There is no motivation for me to get drunk. I don't even understand that motivation, but I'm sure some people really enjoy that. But for me, it's like, I don't want to go there. And so really drawing clear lines that then allows me to, if you say be disciplined, it's there's a line, I'm not going to cross it. Here's another podcast thing to end with that probably applies. They said, try to pre-decide as much as possible. So we're bombarded with thousands of decisions every day, right? And if you're trying to figure out every decision when it comes up, it's stressful and it's decision overload. But if you can build, whether it's principles or philosophies or decisions in life, and say, I'm going to pre-decide how much I'm going to drink in any one sitting, right? I'm going to pre-decide what the first hour of my day is going to look like. I'm going to pre-decide those things. Then that kind of informs your habits and informs your disciplines and informs your decision making. And so I love that advice, is try to look at your life and say, how many things can I pre-decide? So when it comes up, it's already done. I don't have to make that new decision, right? Because I've already put those lines in place, and I can focus on the decisions I haven't figured out yet, right? So pre-deciding is my new kind of recent realization of trying to do that as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And I've seen you do it when the drinks can be flowing and we're enjoying some good old fashions and whatever else. And I've seen you just go, nope, that's two. And this is sort of a trend that's been popping up lately on the podcast, as well as the idea of having rules. I like what you called it with pre-decisions. But when it's rules, people don't really question the rules. Hey, I've got a 2-drink maximum. That's my rule. And it's really hard to question a rule versus like, oh, come on, Rich, just one more. We're having fun. You're like, nope, that's my rule. I've already pre-decided. And it makes that very, very simple. Well, with that, we will wind down the podcast. Rich, thanks again for coming on. And for anybody that wants to learn more about Rich or the K21 Health Foundation, you can check that out. If you're in Kosciuszko County and had not known about it, if you've been living under a rock and you've got your heartstrings that have been pulled on, you want to make an impact, by all means, reach out to K21. And if you're outside of Kosciuszko County, what are you doing out there? Come check out our community. It's not all bad. Winters are not the best, but we make the best of our summers. So with that, we will wind things down, and we look forward to continuing episode 3 of the relationship series next week. Thanks so much, Rich.
Thank you, guys.